Good afternoon. Welcome to Let's Talk TCI Real Estate. It's always a pleasure to be in your home on a Thursday afternoon. It's always a pleasure to be on your cell phones. You shouldn't be driving with your cell phones, but I know some people do while you're driving down the highway and you have it on the passenger side of the car and you're listening to Let's Talk TCI Real Estate. I will encourage you to please like and share this page because today we have an exciting guest on and I am looking forward to this exciting conversation. You know, some people say, oh, you get all excited when talking about real estate. Yes, and especially when I have an exciting guest panelist on with me as well. So I'm looking forward to the show today. As you know, I always will just give a shout out to the guests from the previous show, and I just want to extend deepest gratitude to Mr. Vaughn Paisley from GNP. He appeared on the show last week and he spoke about mortgage opportunities in the private sector. It was a very interesting show. I think you should take use an opportunity to go back and review the content of it for anyone who's looking to actually secure a mortgage in the Turks and Caicos Islands. All right. So today's show is about what's happening on the island of Grand Turk. Please listen attentively as myself and my guests, we speak about the past, the present, and the future of Grand Turk. So the guest panelist for today's show is, before I say that, if you have a comment or if you do have a question, please feel free to put it in the comments section so that we can see and understand what you're thinking and want to know about the island of Grand Turk. All right. So my guest panelist for today is the Honorable Lillian Misick. She is a former principal of the H.J. Robinson High School. She's an educator. She's also the former chairman of the Consultative Forum and also a former governor appointed member of the House of Assembly. She's also an entrepreneur and she is a strong and a passionate lady when it comes to the island of Grand Turk. That's just a brief synopsis of this strong lady. And at this time, I am going to give her an opportunity to just say something further about herself as she introduced herself to you, the listening audience. Good afternoon, Honorable Misick.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon. And thank you for inviting me to be a part of your show this afternoon. And in terms of introducing myself, I could just use two words and say, copy that. I don't know that there's much more to add to that, but I can say to you this afternoon that, well, I was born in Grand Turk. Grew up, or the old people say born and bred in Grand Turk, and say for a couple of years when I went abroad to school, I've lived here all of my life. And so Grand Turk is really home. It's really home for me. I've had opportunities presented to me to leave and go elsewhere, but I declined because apart from the fact that it is where I was born, I believe very strongly that this is the place I need to be in order to make any valuable contribution to the development of this country. And so to add to what you said just now, I've been here, I've been around for more than 6 decades. I've spent over 50 years giving service to this country in the field of education. I've served on various statutory bodies. Like you say, I'm an entrepreneur and have been putting my hands in dough. Not the figurative, well, the literal dough. The literal dough, yes, but not the figurative one in terms of, with the eagle on it. But I've been around doing that for the last 30 odd years. And so I'm still small by choice. my business is still small because I choose to, to keep it small. So that's it for me. I'm a mother, grandmother, going for the second time around, trying to bring up another two. So that's me.
Well, it's definitely a pleasure to be able to have a conversation with you. Everyone, well, many, I would say, know of you on the island of Grand Turk. And so I feel privileged to be able to sit with you today and discuss what's happening on Grand Turk. So we're going to start a little soft, and then we're going to get into some of the harder questions. And I'm actually, this is an opportunity for me as well. Even though I'm familiar with Grand Turk, I've traveled to Grand Turk, just getting down to the history of what's happening on Grand Turk is really exciting and interesting for me. So I am going to ask you, just give me a little bit of history about Grand Turk.
Well, Grand Turk has been, well, I was about to say on the map, but we've been around since, in terms of recording, we've been around since the 16th century. I mean, it has been said that Ponce de Leon, came across our shores back in the 16th century. We had dear Columbus coming to our shores. And it is, I mean, we have very, very credible evidence that it was here that he made his landfall, although it's being disputed in the Bahamas. But credible evidence suggests that Grand Turk was the place where he made his landfall. But but we've been around since then. We had the Taino Indians who came, and not very many of them. Most of them were found down in the other islands, the Lower Island group in Middle and North Caicos. But then in the early 17th century, we had, around the mid 17th century, we had the Bermudans who came to rig salt in Grand Turk. And I think that is where people begin to understand our history, that it started then. For them, it started when the Bermudans came to rig salt. That was around maybe the 3/4 way in the 17th century, somewhere around the 1680s, when the Bermudans came to rig salt. And Grand Turk was the place they came. Grand Turk became the focal point for them, and it became the capital of the Turks and Caicos Islands, and remained that way until this day. But salt raking is the main industry.
Right. Mentioning the Bermudians, I know that a lot of times the architecture of Grand Turk is often referred to as Bermudian style buildings. And I guess it's because of the presence of the Bermudians during the salt raking industry time period.
And I will mention that architecture a little later on when you ask me, when we go into some depth about some of the things that I see being needed in Grand Turk.
Okay. So let me ask you this then. Every island has its historic sites. Can you point out a few of those historic sites on Grand Turk? Because I'll tell you the truth, I've been to Grand Turk, and I have actually been a local tourist, more than once, literally booked a trip specifically for sightseeing. But can you tell me what are some of these historic sites?
Well, yes. Well, one of the more renowned ones is the lighthouse, which was constructed in the United Kingdom and assembled, came in parts and assembled in Grand Turk, located on the northern end of the island. And the reason for that was because on that northern end, we have a lot of dangerous reefs. So ships got wrecked there on a rather regular basis. And so the lighthouse was constructed in the UK, disassembled, and then brought to Grand Turk and assembled back in 1852. So that is one of the historic sites that we have. A second historic site that we have is the prison, the old prison, which is located in the center of Grand Turk. And of course, the the Victoria Public Library, which was damaged several years ago, has now been rebuilt, but not yet commissioned. And then we have the Legislative Council building.
Mhm.
That is one of the buildings in the government compound, which is basically being left to fall into disrepair and decay. But that's a historic building. Then we have the two bases, the naval base
Right.
and one on the southern end. Now, those bases were constructed in the 50s. And the north base in particular was used as a tracking station, satellite tracking station, and was particularly important during the Cold War. When we had the Cuban Missile Crisis, it was at that naval base that they did all the tracking. And then, of course, the southern base, which is also another important facility in Grand Turk, serving a similar purpose. And then there is, people don't talk about it much, but the Colonel Murray Hill, which is on the highest point in Grand Turk, about 89 feet. We call it Nookie Hill,
Right.
but it's a very important site as well, because also that was part of the whole tracking program for the United States. And then if you come downtown and you kind of traverse through what we call Duke Street,
Mhm.
come up, there's a salt raker, you come through there. And then one of the first commercial facilities that you pass, not necessarily, I'm not talking about the Katina, I'm talking about the older one, which was Salt Raker, the Salt Raker Inn.
Mhm.
That building has a lot of history, yeah?
Mhm.
And at that building was owned by a white couple. And they claimed, and you see, it is so important for people to understand how, what history is all about. Because sometimes if we don't understand what happened in the past, we have difficulty, creating a path for us for the future. But that particular building has some historic value, in the sense that the occupants of that property also claimed the beach.
Okay.
And they made, put restrictions that we could not go on that beach. Well, we were always a defiant set of people in the town. And so, despite the fact that he said it, there were persons in this town who we showed him that, listen, it does not belong to you. So we didn't have to wait for Jack down in Barbados to say that this is our beach and the beach don't belong to you. We demonstrated that it was our beach. So that's a historic area. You come through there and
Sorry,
you
before
see.
you finish, just talking about the demonstration. So are you telling me that the people of Grand Turk, they are people of action then?
Yeah, well, they
Okay.
certainly were back then. Sometimes I wonder now if we have lost our militancy, but certainly back then they were. And
Right.
so we come through there, and then of course you come to the Turk's Head Inn, which is another very historic building,
Mhm.
owned by the whites. And right through there, right, if you come right down through there, then
Mhm.
you come across the cable and wireless building.
Mhm.
And of course, we have the Methodist, what used to be the Methodist manse.
Mhm.
And then there's the old treasury,
Okay.
there's the old post office, then we have the old legislative council building. So the whole street, that whole front street, is a historic site. And it's unfortunate that some of the buildings have been destroyed.
Mhm.
Some have been allowed to fall into disrepair, and it's just unfortunate that because we're losing the history, eh?
Mhm.
And then you continue down that road, which I must tell you, when you look at Mother Nature has done a real number on Front Street, because
Yeah.
the landmass extended out further out than where it is at the moment.
Mhm.
Then we come down to the St. Mary's Pro Cathedral. Then there's the Anglican Manse. As I said, the Victoria Public Library, and then you come down a little further to the Oddfellows Lodge. Now that building has some serious historic value, because it was from that particular building that the proclamation ending slavery was made, from that building. So that whole stretch
Mhm.
has historic value, and I think a restoration of many of the buildings on that stretch
Mhm.
could be undertaken, and you'll have a story to tell when tourists come, and allow them to alight from the vans or the trolleys or tram cars or whatever they're traveling on, and get a sense of what Grand Turk
It's
was
about.
like.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah, because I've always heard about Front Street, and I know that there are historic buildings, but I didn't realize how many of them really played an important part in history. But it seems as if practically all of those buildings has a story in itself.
They're just demolished Harbor House, what used to be Harbor House.
Mhm.
But that particular spot was where, when they brought the salt from the ponds, that
Mhm.
is where the salt was piled up, in that particular spot. Now I noticed that they have demolished the structure, and I don't know what the plans are. If the
Right.
plans are to build something, but I think that on that particular site, there ought to be something that captures the historic value and importance of that particular site in the history of Grand Turk.
Right. No, that sounds fair. So let me ask you this question. So every island, like we've been talking about the historical sites, every island has its unique characteristics. What would you say is unique about Grand Turk that separates Grand Turk from the other islands?
I think it's the salt industry. The salt industry, our history has been built around the salt industry. The in Salt Key and South Caicos, which forms a part of the Turks Island group, they call it. And then, of
Mhm.
course, there's the Caicos Islands, Providenciales, North, Middle. We're the Salt Islands. We're known as the Salt Islands, where the Bermudans came, the center for the administrative center
Mhm.
was in Grand Turk, became the capital. And it's interesting because it was in Grand Turk where we had the oversight from the British and from the Bermudans. And it was interesting that one of our scholars said back in 2010 that it was that influence from the British
Mhm.
that that made us different from those down in the other islands. He claims that because of their influence, we were a bit more conservative. I'm not too sure that that is correct, but of course that's a matter of opinion.
Right.
But that is the view that because of that influence.
Mhm.
And then of course, we had the two American bases in Grand Turk back in the 50s when those bases were constructed. We had those. And so we had that influence from North America. We had it from the English, we had it from the Bermudans, and we had it from the Americans. So given that, it it could be perceived as a bit complex. But for me, what has made us so unique is the salt industry and the fact that everything's centered around our economy, the social and political culture centered around the salt industry.
I'm just throwing this question out there, so you feel free to voice your opinion on now, but just want to know, just because you're talking about the salt industry, I know that, it's, people say we're now in the 21st century, people are looking towards more technology, et cetera. Do you feel that reviving the salt industry would be of any benefit to Grand Turk, or its people, or would you want to do it? Seeing that it played such an important part in history?
It did, but I'm not sure that reviving it is an economically beneficial route to take, because the salt industry died because it became highly mechanized in the North American country. And in Grand Turk, for example, the efficiency of production was what led also to the decline in the industry. The competition from outside, and the fact that in Grand Turk, for example, we did not have the kind of facility to facilitate transport of the salt from Grand Turk. Well, let me just explain that a little further. The ships had to come in, and they would dock out on the edge of the deep, we call it. Mm-hmm. And then these little skipper boats would come in, collect the salt, and transport it to the larger ships. But you had to be, we had to be conscious also of the time of year. If you were to come to Grand Turk around November time, October, November time, you will see that the sea, we constantly have that weather that comes from the west. We call it the northwest. And so when ships come in, and during that period, there were delays. And we know that when you're doing business, delays could impact profitability. And so all of that was part of that. And the fact that, those who are working the salt industry, they were free now, no longer slaves, they were free. They couldn't own any property, really. They couldn't own the ponds, the salt pans. And so the industry died, and persons were forced to look elsewhere for employment. Okay. But competition and other, technology, I don't think that trying to revive the industry per se, but certainly I think that its influence of the industry and the history of it could impact on how we move forward and developing other options for our economy in Grand Turk.
Okay. So let me just say, actually, this getting personal, but not personal. What would you say were some of your most challenging moments growing up on the island of Grand Turk? And what were some of the best moments?
I've pondered this over the years. I've pondered it, and I've been trying to come up with a response, really, over the years about the challenging times. And the only challenging times, I think, that I can recall were those periods when, we just did not have enough money. We didn't have that amount of money to do all the things that my parents would wanted to do for us. And they made sure, particularly my mother, because we come from a matriarchal society. My mother made sure that whatever 2 cents that my father made, she stretched it. And so I can recall one day in the classroom when I was teaching, and I was sharing a story with the students. And I said how, we went to school. We're not sure where we were going to get any lunch. We went to school. We went back home for the lunch. You got some sugar and water and a piece of bread. And then you went back to school. And they were like, no, that couldn't possibly have happened. And I said, yes, it happened. You go with that bread and sugar and water, but you weren't sure when you get home in the afternoon if there would be anything. And I recall many afternoons, my mother waiting for the fisherman, our neighbor, to come in to get some fish so that she could cook something for us. So people might say it was challenging, but it was the reality of the time. But what it did, it helped to form the kind of character that we ended up having. You understood what it was like to get, to want, to have, and the fact that you had to work for it. And I can recall also my mother saying to us, I will do what is necessary to send you to school to get an education. She said, you'll get it because it's free. She didn't have to pay for it. She said, but anything after high school, you've got to work hard, perform, to see if the government will give you something. So those were some of the things in terms of any challenge. But for the best moments in my recollection of life growing up in Grand Turk was the fact that we operated really and truly in a community where everybody looked after everybody else's child. Real diehard community, a community that instilled values, sound values in the children in this country, in this island, values that stood the test of time and that prepared you for the world outside. You could not do anything as a child. You could not let anybody, your neighbor or anybody, see you doing anything that was contrary to what you should be doing, because you're going to get reported. And that was the kind of society we had, irrespective of who you were, whether you from town, you from Baxalina, you from the Weeds, you from the garden. We were really and truly one community, no separation.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I would like to say, based on when you were talking about the challenges, I do agree with you. I think that what actually makes the person stronger, because I feel that not just your story, but just hearing stories of other folks in time past, the struggles that they went through actually made them stronger and wiser today. In our society today, we have where, the younger folks have everything at their fingertips. And so sometimes in my opinion, I feel like it is harder instilling those same values in the child because they are just so accustomed to having everything to their need. And I do understand that as parents, I'm a parent myself, you want to be able to give your child what you were not afforded. But at the same time, I think that like your parent, they did an excellent job. Even though it may have seemed tough, I thought it brought out, like you said, a stronger character in your generation because of the lifestyle. And I also believe that because there were so many people experiencing the same thing and on the same level, I think it made it even a little bit easier as well. That's what I would like to say about that. And I think that in terms of your best moments, and the community spirit, I just love to hear about a community spirit, because I think today in time, we need a lot more of that community spirit to continue on. But I'll say this, I still see a lot of community spirit in Grand Turk. I don't live in Grand Turk and I don't have all the ins and out, but I mean, from what I've seen on the surface, I still think that community aspect still exists in Grand Turk to a level. So I would want to ask. Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Yes, go ahead. No,
No,
you
I
go
just
ahead.
want to ask another question based on that, or if you have a comment, you can go forward.
Mhm.
No? So let me just ask
Now
you
ask
now,
your question.
fast forward to now. So what do you feel about the current status of Grand Turk in terms of, okay, infrastructure and social and economic development where it is now? And I will add one more question on to that. If you were in a position to determine the future of Grand Turk in terms of its economy and infrastructure, what would it look like in your view? I can repeat
Well,
if I have to.
Grand Turk, no, I got it. Grand Turk has historically been the center, um, administrative and political center of Grand Turk,
Mhm.
and it's been that way since the 18th century. Now, we had I've seen the change. I've witnessed the change in that over the last three decades. The ushering in of ministerial government back in the 70s uh,
Mhm.
saw Grand Turk being, basically consolidated. This is the center. This is the capital. And 2 decades after, 2 decades after the establishment, the introduction of ministerial government, we began to see a shift in the mindset of governance. And I use that term broadly. We began to see that movement away from Grand Turk into Providenciales. Now, I'm not sure if you know how Providenciales came to be the engine of economic activity. When the bases closed and the Honorable Jakes McCartney, when he negotiated the closing of the bases and the money that they got from the government, he decided that, yeah, well, Grand Turk is the administrative capital. Yes, we have the public sector here, but we need to do something to jumpstart things in Providenciales. And so the money, some of the money that he got, the money was invested in Providenciales to build the necessary infrastructure for Club Med to come in. That's what he did. And so his whole mindset and his approach was to create the kind of balanced development in all the islands. So Grand Turk is the administrative, Providenciales will be, the tourist center, north and middle agriculture. That was
So
his
basically,
thinking. And I know this
he
because I
had a
know him
master plan
personally.
within his head. He had a master plan.
That's right. That's right. And so that is how Providenciales got its start. Now, I must tell you that there is this perception, and it is a perception in the minds of some people that, Grand Turk people don't like the people in the low islands. That's a perception. I still cannot figure out where it came from, because my recollection growing up in Grand Turk and persons coming to Grand Turk to go to school,
Right.
they live with their own people. Grand
Okay.
Turk people treated them, as far as I know, Grand Turk people treated them okay, but there is this view
Mhm.
that we don't like them. Well, man, listen, if you go in the big United States of America, 52 states, you have people who speak with different accent.
Correct.
That's the reality. Salty people speak differently from Grand Turk people. North and Middle Caicos people speak differently. If you go in the Bight and go in Five Keys, they are different. They have their differences. But at the end of the day, we've got to learn as a people to get past the insularities and the little things, the little differences, and accept that we are all Turks and Caicos Islanders.
Correct.
And so we had that shift. So we had the shift where people, the governments decided, well, they want to be in Providenciales. And so what we began to see was a neglect of the capital of Grand Turk. That's why Grand Turk is the way it is: dirty, broke down buildings, no public sector really, and no private sector really. And really, if we turn a blind eye, there will be no public sector either, because if you were to go on the airport, Jakes McCartney Airport, on a Monday morning or a Tuesday morning, you'd have to ask the questions, why doesn't the government buy its own plane? Because they're all going down to Provo. All going to Provo, they got a meeting. Listen, I am pretty straightforward. And my view is, if the pandemic has shown us nothing, it has certainly taught us that you can use the various platforms to conduct meetings virtually. Save the country money, save some money in the public purse. So Grand Turk has been neglected because of the shift. And the shift is because people perceive Providenciales to be the capital. I must tell you that I was aghast a couple of years ago when I went into Providenciales and I saw a sign at the roundabout, "Welcome to Turks and Caicos." Yeah, that's not Turks and Caicos, that's Providenciales. Providenciales is not Turks and Caicos.
Correct.
So, so we need to do some things for people to understand that Grand Turk is the capital. But if you don't understand your history, you are doomed to make some serious, serious mistakes. And the fact that we were the administrative capital of Turks and Caicos, that should instill some kind of pride in us. We need to understand that our identity is important. And this is what your history teaches you about your identity. If you have no identity, and honestly, I don't think we have any at the moment, because we have allowed our culture to be subsumed beneath other cultures. So we are no longer the dominant culture in Turks and Caicos. And because we are not, we have so many different nationalities amongst us, so many different cultures amongst us, that we don't know who we are. You ask the Turks and Caicos Islander, who are you? I don't know. I don't know. Who are you? I don't know. And that is unfortunate. Grand Turk is, as I said, it's dirty, it broke down buildings, and they need to do something about Grand Turk. You need to restore some pride and some dignity in this town. You pass and you see people living in substandard housing. You have persons throwing garbage out of their car windows. There's a total disregard for law and order. Cars with no license, they're driving, and I don't know how they get licenses, because the tint on the vehicles are so dark. You wonder, how is it that you were able? So there's a total it's a breakdown. It's a breakdown in this town. I don't know about Providenciales because I don't come there, but there's a total breakdown of law, order, pride, and dignity in this town.
So where do you think that change needs to come from, for that difference to start coming about?
It needs to come from leadership. Now, every time I utter the word leadership, people immediately assume I'm talking about political leadership. No, I'm not talking about political leadership. That's just one. It's just one aspect of it, because we have leadership in the political directorate, but we also have the churches and other NGOs, other social organizations. It needs to come from the home, in the home and in the schools. You see, when I was growing up, we had values instilled in us at home. Those values were concretized when you get to school and in the society. And of course, there's law and order that was always maintained. So everybody essentially understood what it was like to produce the kind of society that you wanted, and they supported the values that they knew would create and build strong characters in this country. And so we need to get back to it. But unfortunately, with the importation of so many different cultures, and ours not being the dominant culture, everybody bringing in their own culture. As a matter of fact, I don't know if how much you follow Facebook. I wrote something, I think 2 weeks ago, on the collision of standards. Everybody with their own standards. And nothing reflects the standard that I knew that we had in this country, over the many decades. And nothing reflects it. It's all different, every different.
Yes.
Poor housing, poor standards, rude children. I mean, mind you, I'm not saying that the children back then weren't angels, but good Lord, you got some young people nowadays that I don't know.
Right.
But
Go ahead.
But what do I want to see? But in the same vein, what is it that we could do for Grand Turk to bring back some dignity, change the trajectory that the country, this town, is on? Private sector. We have Carnival. Now, I know you and I had spoken about the ratio of public-private sector. I can't definitively say what percentage it is because I don't know.
Right.
But I do know that, for example, separate and apart from the government, the public sector, and then of course we have cable and wireless. We have a couple of small hotels. We have Carnival being one of the other largest private sector entities in Grand Turk.
Okay.
We know that is important. We know that is important because after Hurricanes Ike and Maria, when it closed down for a bit, we felt the impact. And then with the pandemic over the last 2.5 years, the impact was even greater because you had the movement of people out of, they went home, the port was shut down, no employment, businesses suffered as a result. So in terms of economic activity, I see Grand Turk in my own mind. I envision a Grand Turk that reflects a lot of its history through the introduction of some new measures. Now, you say you've been to Grand Turk, so you've seen the salinas. That's where we rig the salt.
Correct.
But those ponds, historic value, history, it is what has made us. And people talk about resilience. It is what made you resilient, because if you were to look at what the earnings were and how people were able to use the small earnings that they had to support their families, it speaks to the character of the people. Right. And so I envision a Grand Turk where you can take the same salinas and you create a kind of, well, like a kind of crystal lagoons. I don't know if you've heard of crystal lagoons, but a kind of crystal lagoons where they're developing them all over the world. But we have a natural one here, ones here at the moment. Take them, we can use those ponds, use pumps, put pumps in them to aerate them. Go down, deepen them a bit. You wall them in, you recreate the windmills that they use to assist in the production of the salt. You can have the little cobblestone pathways in the ponds, because they were separated. We used to walk the pond trench, we call them, back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
You can have these little paddle boats in the pond that will create a kind of another type of activity for tourists when they come. All the time, your history is being
Preserved.
revived, and you let them know what it was, and I see us doing that. But the government needs to make a decision. I find successive governments seem to be afraid to make sound decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Make the decision and stick with it, and stop allowing people to dump stuff in the pond saying they're filling them in, because they don't have any proper engineering and any proper skills when they're putting all kinds of dumping stuff in the ponds. And,
Right.
and do that and allow the pond to serve a dual purpose as an ecotourism product, and also for drainage purposes. But you have to aerate the ponds. It can't be left there stinking because all that silt at the bottom of the pond. And you're creating business opportunity, and you're creating employment opportunities as well.
Correct.
So that's what I see in Grand Turk for the ponds. I mean, if you were to come here now, I mean, you'll hold your head down. I'm being realistic, because one of those right to the front, somebody is dumping. Somebody is dumping all of the garbage from the demolished structure right there. Where are you going with it? What are you doing? But I don't know if you realize that this country is a country of laws, eh?
Mm-hmm.
But they lack policing. They lack compliance.
That's the main thing, like you say. You have laws. If you don't police it, then the laws doesn't mean anything.
And I can tell you, if the pages were any shorter, some of the laws would fall off the book.
That's a good way to put it. So let me ask you this question, because you were talking, previously you talked about private sector, public sector ratios. Do you think that there is still additional room for private sector opportunities in Grand Turk?
Of course. We have, one of the good things is that we have tourists coming in on the cruise ship.
Mm-hmm.
But when they come, if they see things that are interesting, they may decide to return as a visitor, a land tourist. But we have to have things. We have to create these things in Grand Turk, and it is always the discussion about which comes first, is the chicken or the egg?
Mm-hmm.
We've got to take the step forward and begin to create things that we know persons may be interested in. When you look for example at the lighthouse.
Mm-hmm.
The government gave the lighthouse to Chukka, I think. The lighthouse is to Chukka, the prison to Chukka. After the hurricanes, they just left. After the pandemic, Chukka left our historic lighthouse and went by their business. When the cruise ship returned, I personally went down there to see what was happening. Everything was in disarray. And I was like, oh my God, and tourists are coming in here today? What are you doing? Why are we doing this?
Right.
But the government needs to take a position. Why the prison is still there, sitting there closed down, when it could be an attraction? Because take it away from China. I don't know what kind of contracts the government signed, because my understanding in Law 101, when you're doing a contract, there must be a break clause somewhere in there. I think that's what I learned. There must be a break clause in the contracts. If they're not doing what they're supposed to do, then you take it away from them. That's ours. That's the way I see it. It belongs to us, the people. And so the representatives must do what they have to do in the interest of the people.
Yeah. And like you said, and the historic sites are actually here to be a benefit to the island. And like you said, so there are opportunities that can come out of making sure that these historic sites are in the great shape, into the condition to receive tourists, residents, and everyone else to help make the island more successful. So let me also ask you, what type of, like you say, there can be more private sector opportunities or businesses, what kind of businesses do you think is needed, and how can we diversify the economy in Grand Turk?
But I think we need to have, well, first of all, I'm not too sure. I'm not too sure about what arrangement exists between the
Correct.
government and Carnival.
Right.
What I can tell you from my own knowledge is that before the closure of TC Invest, we operated the small business section in within the ambit of TC Invest.
Okay.
And one of the things that we were looking at is the small business opportunities for persons down at the cruise port.
Okay.
When they started, we did have persons who had, operated their little stalls down in the cruise port. But the problem was always that the rental fee was exorbitant and it made no sense. And then, well, I mean, it made no sense because persons were unable to make ends meet. They couldn't even break even
Right.
because of the whatever monies they made, they had to pay for the
Rent.
rent of the space down there. So I don't know what the arrangement is at the port at the moment. I know that there's a lot of people are discontented with some new arrangement that they do have. But I think that, the government needs to create some kind of opportunity so that persons can directly benefit from the arrival of so many tourists coming into. Yeah, yes, you want to protect the tourists, but you also have to give your own people an opportunity to benefit from it. And then, of course, you have other opportunities that could, we could generate, we could capitalize on from the whole idea that persons can return as visitors. If we were, for example, to introduce into Grand Turk other opportunities. We have an entertainment business, for example. Someone said to me when I talk about the movie theater, oh, nobody can watch the movies. And I said, but that's not true. When you go into a movie house, there's a different type of environment. It creates another type of feeling for individuals. You can stay home and watch a television. That's true. You can. But the movie house, when you go into a movie theater and you're watching a movie on a big screen, the whole environment in that theater does something for people. It could be far more relaxing.
Correct.
For persons, okay? I think, and we used to have movie theater here. This town lacks any kind of, the recreational activity.
Right.
Every time, they talk about the young people, oh, we give them a basketball court. They need more than a basketball court. You have adults like myself, for example. If I decide, look, I want to go out for my birthday, where am I going? Where am I going? Let me go somewhere where I can do some fine dining. I'll go and I have a nice dinner, with some candlelight and whatever else you want to share with me. But fine dining is something that you can have in Grand Turk. You better not go out of your house to say you're going anywhere. Some little young fellas around the place creating havoc all over the place. You can't. They need something like that. Tourists coming in, they would need something too. Sometimes people come from Providenciales, the capital, and they want to overnight. Something like that. So that's another opportunity. We used to have the golf course, the mini golf course down at Waterloo. They need to reopen that, restore it. They tell me that the Waterloo house, the governor's house has been restored and they're back.
Right.
Well, do something about the golf course as well, because you can encourage young people to also become involved in golfing. So those are a number of activities that I see. I got a long list of them, but I know time would not allow. So maybe I'll take my Facebook page and I'll probably share the rest of it. But these things must happen when we can ensure that we have reliable services also.
Yes.
One of the issues that Grand Turk has right now is the lack of reliable potable water.
Mm.
Residents on the northern end of this island have not had that since last year. They are upset because for many of them, they cannot afford a tank of water. Tank of water costs $165 upward.
Mhm.
And I've spoken to people who have said, look, I have a household, of 4 children, 5 persons. I can't afford to be buying water on a regular basis like that. And so the government needs to step in and don't make the promise, just do what you said you have to do. You're running a reverse osmosis plant. You must know that maintenance will be required. So at the beginning of every year, you make sure that you have all your parts, your spare parts in place to get water is a necessity.
Correct.
My 9-year-old grandson said to me yesterday, Mama, do you know that water makes up 90% of the blood? I said, really? Mm-hmm. He said, yes. Do you know that you can go without food for weeks, but you can't go without water for more than a couple of days? It speaks to the fact that water is so essential for people's survival. And without it, we're going to run into problems. So I think a reliable potable water supply is what is needed in Grand Turk so that we can do all the other things that my mind envisioned that we can do.
Yes, I concur with that whole thing about the water supply. I think it's an ongoing issue, and I think that's something that needs to be dealt with like yesterday. So you also, in your conversation, you were talking about Carnival. So I'll ask you this question. Are you satisfied with the social and economic impact that Carnival has had in Grand Turk, or is there room for improvement?
I can only say, as far as the economic impact, as it relates to employment, and I know that persons, we have people who are employed down at the Carnival Cruise Port. We have the taxi drivers who are disgruntled as well because they're not getting the kind of fares that they would normally expect.
Mm-hmm.
And then you see Carnival really is a monopoly. Carnival has monopolized a lot of stuff in this town, and even some of the businesses that are operate through Carnival. So when you do your bookings, when tourists do their bookings to travel, cruise passengers, they get all their tours are done through Carnival. And so a lot of the disgruntlement with the operators of the taxis, water sports,
Right.
is because they are not getting the kind of share and opportunity from the Carnival Cruise port as they had expected. Now, as far as the social, what I do know is that back 10 years ago, there was they had established what they call a Carnival Infrastructure Fund.
Right, I knew
And
about that. Yeah.
that fund was supposed to assist in developing tourist attractions and other things for the tourists when they come to Grand Turk.
Right.
We managed it. Well, I was the person who represented the government at the time. We had the suspension of the Constitution,
Correct.
and so I was one of those persons in the lead there. And we invited persons in Grand Turk, organizations and others to submit proposals to develop tourist attractions. I can tell you that the museum benefited tremendously from it because they submitted projects, and also the Oddfellows Lodge. That's where they got their funding from to refurbish the Oddfellows building. I don't know. We had drawn up a proposal for the restoration of the historic Middle Street. That street is where the Mary Prince building, where Mary Prince, the slave, where Mary Prince lived. And when we toured through there, that was one of the places that we identified that we could that could be restored. The old police constabulary, that was another one that was identified as a place where you can convert it to become a kind of museum, but a video museum reflecting all the history of the Grand Turk in particular. And through that other Bermudan style buildings to be restored and create a path. And then at the end of it, if you're coming from north, but at the entrance, if you're going to the north, was the Miss Helena Robinson, her house. And we thought that that house also should be restored as a historic building and just make that a path, a pedestrian path, no vehicles. I don't know what happened to all of that, but those plans were there, and we were to use from the Carnival Infrastructure Fund, because they had agreed that that was something that we could do. So that would have made a tremendous social impact on Grand Turk. What happened when we had a return to elected government? I can't see. So we're still there.
So basically, what I've gathered from you as well is so far is that with Carnival, you are getting the numbers in terms of tourists arriving on the island that can probably make a difference, but it's just about making sure that these tourists are able to filtrate throughout the island of Grand Turk in the right places in order to make that social difference and economic difference to the persons on Grand Turk.
Yes, because at the moment, the only economic difference is the head tax.
Right.
It's the head tax. It's not filtering down really
To the people.
to the average man. That's right. It is not. I mean, even in the downtown area, those persons on the front street who have their little booths, I'm not convinced that they are feeling the impact. Because what essentially has happened is that because the tours are booked through Carnival, they take them where they want them to go. And so historically, we're just left out. We're just left out of being the real true beneficiaries
of it,
of wealth generation in this country.
Okay. Yeah, the reason I'm asking that is because, sometimes people say, well, okay, bringing Carnival to Grand Turk, has not made a difference. Some people feel like it has made a difference, but based on what you're saying, I feel that it can make a difference, but it's just about how that difference is made based on how you allow the residents of the islands to be benefited from it. They're actually bringing enough people to the island to make that difference, but it just needs to filter down to the people.
That's right. That's right. And I can tell you, right? And I can tell you, and this the mindset is one that I find rather disturbing, because one of the latest actions by one of the Carnival operators, we'll call it that, persons who benefiting from their tours being booked through Carnival, is the opening of a restaurant. And the view that has been expressed by those persons, the operator, is that, look, rather than taking my guests, I'm bringing them down in my van,
Right.
my tram, rather than taking them down to areas where Turks and Caicos Islanders have restaurants and prepare local food and all of that.
Right.
So I could do that. I can open up a restaurant and I can do that for myself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that what I saw, I'm not sure if there's any merit in it. And so I try not to comment on things if I'm not sure about them. However, I can say that if we are to move forward as a country,
Right.
there are some things that we as Turks and Caicos Islanders need to learn.
Okay.
And one thing we need to learn is to stop the fronting.
I know that's been a big issue, and I've seen a number of articles about that recently. Ad Forbes has also done a number of articles about that on Facebook, in the newspaper as well. So it's interesting that you brought that up. But go ahead.
They need to stop it, and also in Grand Turk, historically, when I was growing up, every small business, food business, was owned by a Turks and Caicos Islander. Not today. Not today. Every food store in this town is owned by an expatriate. Every one of them. The traditional big stores and the little stores. That is concerning because it speaks to the fact that as Turks and Caicos Islanders, we've lost something along the way. Food security is important. You ought not to allow yourselves to become we're subjected to it. And I wrote a piece that I posted on my Facebook page because that's my platform.
Right.
I post what I want on there.
Yes.
And I warned the people in this town when IGA came in with their little store. They got eyes on Mr. C's building. I said, watch it. They're going to become the monopoly in this town.
Mm-hmm.
And they have. They have. And then we allow some Indians to come in down at West Road. They open up one in Baxalina, and then some more Indians out there along the way. So they have created monopolies in this town, and Turks and Caicos Islanders have been pushed, allowed themselves to be pushed.
Be pushed out. So talking about that, I'll say this. Do you feel that Grand Turk, the island of Grand Turk is worth investing in? And when I say investing, I'm not just thinking from non-resident, I'm thinking residents as well. Do you think Grand Turk is worth investing in based on what you've said then?
Well, it will have to do with population, because we know that no business can operate unless you have people. You've got to have people for businesses to operate and be profitable.
Right.
And so it will have to be done in concert with the government sitting down and seriously considering a population policy. How are we going to move forward in creating a kind of balanced development in the Turks and Caicos? What is it we want? What is it we want for North? What is it for Middle? What for Providenciales? Where are we going to fit Grand Turk, Saltby, and South Caicos? I can tell you because I was a part of a national development plan that was done in the early 2000s.
Okay.
And that national development plan took into consideration the characteristics of each island in this chain. What is it that will suit North Caicos? And they came up with it because they went and they had consultations with the people in North Caicos. North Caicos people said, this is what we want.
Right.
Similarly, South Caicos said fishing. That's the fishing capital. This is what it is. And so that has been done already. And I know that study cost us about $500,000, and it's somewhere on a broken down shelf. We've got to stop that as a country. We are a country of new beginnings. We begin afresh every 4 years.
It's interesting that you said it because currently there is a new development plan that was just recently implemented. Do you feel like those considerations were also taken into account?
I can't speak to that.
You know what? You know what? Plead the fifth on that one.
I haven't seen it. I haven't read it yet.
Okay.
But when I do, I will come.
Okay, but I will say this about the new development plan. Actually, when I heard about it in the consultation, I was actually really excited about it because, like, knowing that there's a plan for the island, that brought excitement to me. Because based on everything you've said and others are saying, we need to have a plan ahead. So we're not just pulling straws out of a hat, and we know the direction that we are going into. So so far, and what I have read, um, from the development plan. I haven't read it in its entirety because it is a very extensive document. I've been just picking out pieces based on when I need it. So far, I'm impressed with what have been put in the new development plan. So I would say that much about it, but it's basically about making sure we have a future plan for the country of the Turks and Caicos Islands. So I want to ask you one more question, and because 45 minutes, believe it or not, it has already passed and gone, I want to ask one more question.
Really?
One more question. I just want to just say to all those who are listening, thank you so much for listening. I am seeing your comments. Definitely add your comments. If you have a question, please put it in this last minute that we are here. And so just keep looking down because I'm looking at my phone. And I want to ask you this question because I don't think I can end the show unless I ask about this. The wildlife in Grand Turk. Everybody goes to Grand Turk. Of course, the wildlife is evident. It's a part of everyday living for residents. What do you think is the best remedy in order to deal with this situation?
Give them a home. Give them a home. We have the North Wells, we have the South Wells, and we have some wells down on the western end of the island. Pen the animals in. It can create, again, we have a business opportunity for persons. You have tourists coming in, you can give them a tour, but it has to be a plan. You can't just say, well, we're gonna pen them in, and you've got to make it secure so that if you know, because what has been happening is we say we had a pound down here, and they'll pen the animals in, and then somebody will go and let the animals out, and then you got to pay them to go and bring the animals again. It has to be a plan. You pen them, and you create an attraction, with the animals, whether it's the horses or the donkeys,
right?
And that is a business opportunity. Now I can tell you that when we were before the closure of TCI Invest again, someone had a beautiful plan, came in with a beautiful plan to house the animals, create a business opportunity, and all the things that they could do resulting from having the animals. They're part of our history. They are a part of our history, and there's a lot in it. But I can tell you, and we can end on this note, but I can tell you that the donkeys in particular, those donkeys, if you were to come and you go near them, they're going to run.
Yes.
But you see when the tourists come?
Yes.
No, sorry. They actually go towards them. It's just today, I saw 2 tourists feeding, two of the donkeys. And one scene, I was driving out of my yard one morning, and they were outside. They saw the golf cart coming with the tourists, and the tourists drove straight past them. Those donkeys bawled, and they ran behind the golf cart as the golf cart was going towards the northeast. So you can't touch them. They're the wrong color. You can't touch them. But the tourists, yes. And I think it's because they feed them, they give them little treats. And so, but we can use them. They're part of our history. They present a very viable business opportunity because we have people who are interested in the animals. And I think if persons would do that, seriously consider doing that, then therein lies another opportunity, another attraction to help to sustain the tourists, their interests in Grand Turk.
Right. I agree with you. I think that's a really good idea. And it's a shame that the plan that was put forward, like you said, through the TC Invest at the time, did not come to fruition, because that would have been a really grand opportunity for the island of Grand Turk. And I have also witnessed the same situation with the donkeys, because
Yeah.
I've never been able to touch or feed one of them.
No, you won't be able to. Wrong color.
So let me say this in closing. Is there anything about Grand Turk that we did not touch on that you feel before we close out that it's a must to at least mention before we give closing remarks?
There is just one other thing, I'd like to say, using this opportunity, and that is that the government did make an effort to do something about the vehicles. I believe, though, that the government missed something, because because the whole process for persons getting another vehicle is rather it's bureaucratic, it's tedious, and I don't think that it is accomplishing what we ought to be accomplishing. I think what the government should have done was to the government should have imposed a tax on every vehicle. Not that I'm saying that they should open it up. If you want to bring in vehicles not more than 10 years old, then that's fine. I don't have a difficulty with that. But I think what the government should do is to impose a tax on batteries for vehicles coming, so that you would have something when it comes time to dispose of batteries. And as a matter of fact, they could extend that to electronics as well. You have these old phones and a lot of batteries, and you're just putting them on the dump site, and God knows what is leaking from them all. So I think, I think a little more serious consultation, and not just mouthing consultation. I think some more serious consultation and consideration must go into when you want to do these things in the interests of the people and interests of the country.
Right, definitely. Thank you so much. I just want to say there were a few comments that were coming through, but one person had actually said, I was amazed when I saw that they were feeding them. So just a comment on the same conversation of the donkeys. And also a few persons have commented that they enjoyed the show, and she really says what's on her mind. Well, that's the whole aim of the show, just so you can get the truth of what's happening. And of course, today's show is actually about what's happening on Grand Turk. So we can't beat around the bush. We have to let everyone know what's happening on the island of Grand Turk. I must say, it was a very informative show. We touched a number of issues. And one thing I do like about your remarks to the questions is that you didn't just criticize, but you also gave solutions. And that's the main thing, being able to give solutions so that we can battle whatever condition that we are in. All right. So yes, very great show. So thank you once again, Honorable Misick, for taking the invite and coming on Let's Talk TCI Real Estate. It was a pleasure. And I want to say just to all those who are listening, thank you once again for your comments, for your consistency, and for always taking the time out of your busy schedules to be a part of this great movement of Let's Talk TCI Real Estate. And I'll just say, with that said, I want to say to everyone, until next week, until next time, stay safe and remain blessed. Have a great afternoon. Thank you again, Honorable Misick.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on this show belong solely to Let's Talk TCI Real Estate, and not that of Keller Williams TCI or any of its affiliates. Any action you take upon the information provided on this show is strictly at your own risk, and Let's Talk TCI Real Estate guest or host will not be liable for any losses and damages in connection with the use of the material. I am not an investment advisor, broker, or dealer.